Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Vanessa Mensie. I am the Marketing Manager with Bridge Personnel Services. Today I am joined by our VP of Operation, Janice Sweeney. Welcome, Janice, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Vanessa. I appreciate you having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Anytime I have the opportunity to talk with you. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Bridge Personnel Services is a staffing and recruiting firm in the Chicago area. For 30 years, we have facilitated the growth of our clients' businesses through the successful acquisition of top-performing professionals. Bridge's unique method of sourcing talent has delivered proven results, and Janice has been integral in building that process.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, over the past 25 years, I've certainly been able to gather a tremendous amount of insight on how different businesses function, and recently been talking to a lot of leaders and HR professionals in a variety of different organizations about their worker reentry strategy and thought process that's really gone into developing it.
That is something that is definitely on the forefront of everyone's mind, and that is why we are recording this podcast today. This is actually the first episode in a series that we are making to help businesses and individuals successfully navigate through COVID-19 in a post-COVID world. Our other episodes will cover the topics of recruiting and onboarding, in-office social distancing considerations, conducting an effective job search, and so on. Today, however, we wanted to touch on a common topic that I think often finds itself on the bottom half of the priority checklist, and that is employee morale and engagement. You and I have had many conversations about this. Since February, virtually all businesses have had to make some pretty dramatic changes to their operations. And these changes needed to be made very quickly, for some businesses within a matter of days. In your conversations that you've had, how has having had to adapt to this unique environment shifted workplace dynamics?
Yeah, Vanessa, I think workforce dynamics have really shifted drastically over the past few months, and employers really had little time to respond to those changes brought on by COVID-19. I feel like it was a whirlwind of information being tossed at us, and we had to make a determination of how do we protect everybody and keep our businesses intact. And, as most states put in shelter in places or some type of stay-at-home orders that were requiring non-essential businesses to close their physical place of work, and those who did remain open had to really quickly adapt by putting new safety measures in place to protect those employees who were on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them had to add social distancing policies or different sanitation stations. They added additional cleaning and disinfecting processes. And I think mostly those businesses, those essential businesses, had to try to find enough personal protection equipment, really protecting those essential workers who were required to continue going to work every day. And that was certainly challenging aspects that nobody really had to address before.
Yeah, and those are all really good points for businesses that needed to stay open and were designated as being essential. But what about some of the challenges that were faced by companies who decided to pivot to a remote work environment?
Yeah, there were some businesses were able to shift their teams to working remotely with really little effort, meaning they had the technology in place that allowed them to adapt very quickly. But some companies didn't have the technology in place, and they struggled to make that transition. And those who didn't have that in place were finding it very difficult to find equipment, mainly laptops and monitors, because when you think about it, it wasn't just their business looking for them. It was companies all over the world vying for that same type of equipment to keep their business up and running.
And that's a really interesting point, like having those limited resources. I think for the most part, we've all kind of settled into our own, unique process in working during this pandemic. But now that everyone has sort of figured out how to operate in this environment, what comes next?
To your point, the initial scramble has definitely taken place, and we're over that part, as well as acclimating folks to working remotely. So those pieces are all done. And now that as shelter in places and stay-at-home orders are starting to get lifted and there's less restrictions in states, and they're starting to reopen, the new challenges now is how are we going to phase people back into our work environment and continue to make them feel safe and comfortable as we do that?
That is a good point that you bring up, that the question is, what does my return to work strategy look like? And you yourself have been having this conversation with, some of our business partners. So what are you seeing as important in building an effective workplace strategy, or excuse me, a return to work strategy?
Yeah, I think many businesses are asking that question themselves every single day and working on finding out what that best solution for them is for their worker reentry program.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that looks different from each and every business. As we know, every company is different, every industry is different. So there's never a one solution fits all, especially when it comes to reacclimating your workforce back into your work environment. I don't think a company with 1,500 workers is going to one day say, hey, let's open the floodgates and let everybody come back all at once, because they're certainly going to open themselves up to some safety concerns with that many employees coming back all at one time.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps there could be some type of phasing in plan to bringing people back in. I think one of the things that a business needs to look at is really size. A 4-person doctor's office is going to definitely look different phasing their workers back in than a 300-person call center where everyone sits in very close proximity to each other.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense too. I mean, you can't really say there's a one size fits all return to work program. I mean, in the sense of employee volume, but then also looking at how the different regulations that different states have. So there's a lot of different components that go into building that strategy, and those would have to be unique to the individual organization.
Yeah, that to your point, Vanessa, I think it's really important for businesses to be able to weigh out several items while preparing their worker reentry strategy. And, number one, how do I bring employees back to the workforce, keep them safe and comfortable? And what does that timeline look like to start communicating to our employees? And two, if I don't bring my workers back right away and I continue to keep them working in a remote location, how or does this affect my business performance and productivity as a whole? And three, how do I maximize employee engagement, yet keep a positive and motivating culture throughout that entire process?
And I can definitely see in some businesses how those three components could potentially be in conflict with one another. They don't necessarily have to be, they're not, mutually exclusive by any means, but it does sound like there is a little bit of a balancing act that occurs. So, what are some considerations that employers can take to make sure that they're striking this happy medium?
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act, that's for sure.
Right.
And one that none of us have ever had to experience on this magnitude. Size of the facility is probably one that the employers need to take a look at, meaning how many workers need to be integrated back into the facility? What's that timeline? And obviously, the larger the amount of employees that you have to integrate back into that work environment, the more robust and detailed that plan needs to be.
Sure.
And of course, as a company or as a business, you have to be able to meet CDC guidelines. The CDC has put out guidelines for social distancing between workstations. Right now it's a minimum of 6 feet in between workstations and employees. And you have to be able to determine if can I physically bring people back in, meet the CDC guidelines as well to help keep folks safe. And then I think part of looking at your facility and wondering what areas can be used, meaning, can I safely keep break rooms, cafeterias, conference rooms, any type of employee gathering area? Can I keep it sanitized between users? Can I still keep people socially distanced? How can we go about continuing to keep those areas open Or perhaps we have to consider as part of that reentry program that those areas are closed to use for any employee.
And I think that there's also this unique moment for businesses that have a shared office space or they have an open seating area. There are other considerations on top of everything you just said that they also should consider or need to consider.
Yeah, I think if there's been a lot of companies who have gone to that shared office space or a plug and play office, meaning, somebody comes in, they don't have an assigned desk area or cubicle area or office area, but they come and work. And a lot of times these are very open spaced areas where people can easily just plug in and start to work very easily. But now with a lot of companies who've gone to those open work area stations, that now they have to think about how do we keep the cleanliness of that area between workers using it, because often there's different people using those same areas throughout the day. So it becomes another thought process in the sanitation side of things.
So, when businesses are looking to build out their return to work plan, what specific considerations do they need to incorporate into these strategies so that they are compliant with social distancing measures and CDC guidelines?
Some companies have gone with adding plexiglass or glass partitions between workstations. Just as you see when you go to the grocery store, you now see usually a plexiglass type partition, trying to keep some extra distance between the cashier or worker and the customer as well. Some companies who use conference rooms on a regular basis might have to forego using conference rooms for meetings, and they're going to be conducted virtually at this time. So, as I've talked to companies, they've thought about staggering shift times where perhaps the 8 to 5 that everybody works. Now they're looking at saying some of the team works from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and the next group works from 3 to 11 and having a standard office shift like that to lessen the amount of people who interact with each other in the facility at the same time.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up, Janice. I think that we are often so focused on how to bring back our employees into our office space that we're not necessarily always thinking about what those day-to-day operations will look like, and they will be different. The most obvious example of that, and you touched on this, is the meeting room. Just because we are in the office and we have access to have meetings face to face in a conference room doesn't necessarily mean it's always safe to do that. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. And these social distancing measures will have an impact on our company culture and employee productivity. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, does that level of engagement look different for a business who decides to keep their team working remotely versus the company that decides to bring their employees back into the office?
Vanessa, I think that there are certain businesses out there who can probably function at 100% with all workers working remote, meaning there's little interruption to their typical business process or performance or even their service levels to their customers. And other businesses may be challenged by that. But we also have to look at the worker too. Some function at the same level or even better productivity levels when they're working from home, while the next finds themselves easily distracted and difficult to separate their personal and work life from each other. And that can lead to lower engagement, lower production levels within the team.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point too. These lower engagement levels, these lower production levels, they obviously have a foundation in the efficacy of communication between a team, and there are different challenges associated with having a remote workforce versus having a workforce that's in office.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's something to be said about people working in the same facility. There's the camaraderie where you have friendly conversations and banter amongst team members or colleagues. And, there's a lot of impromptu meetings that happen. And sometimes that can easily get missed when you're not working in close proximity with each other.
One of the questions that I think a lot of people are asking too is, if I decide to bring my team back into the office, what are the consequences to employee morale? I'm just thinking, if I am Elizabeth employee and I'm asked to return to the office before I was personally comfortable doing so, and I'm now asked to participate in these office sanitation procedures, and I have to wear PPE, and now on top of all those things, I can't even walk over to my colleague's desk to have just small talk with them because I need to maintain. Right now, it's a 6 foot distance between them. So, how do team leaders and businesses, how do they enforce these rules in a way where employees won't feel like they're losing their value?
I think communication is always a key component in any environment, but especially when it comes to new processes. And given the circumstances in today's world, I believe most people can truly understand the need for change. Some of those changes might include new rules or processes, maybe when it comes to wearing masks or face coverings in the work environment or in common areas, maybe temporarily closing areas such as a cafeteria, maybe even daily temperature checks. But if a company chooses to temporarily close a cafeteria or asks everybody to remove personal belongings from their desk and not state the why behind it, it could certainly be viewed negatively by some. And feeling that not only did my employer make me come back to the office, but now they started taking things away from me too. But simply explaining that the cafeteria is closed because there's no way to either safely distance or appropriately clean between visitors, or asking people to remove personal items from their desk so it can be appropriately cleaned, will certainly go a long way in helping make employees feel that they're not being punished, but rather the company truly cares about their well-being. We all know tensions can run high during times of change and uncertainty, and it brings on a whole new level of stress for people. But being available to talk to your teams, maybe providing an employee assistance program, and truly listening to your employees to understand the nature of what they're experiencing or their concerns, showing some empathy and compassion can truly go a long way to help maintain a positive morale.
And I think another important point that you bring up is that we are in this very tumultuous time right now. I mean, I shared with you last week that I found this meme that said we've managed to cram a decade of history into 5 months. So it kind of goes without saying that this is a very unprecedented time. And this culture that we have to keep our personal lives separated from our professional lives becomes challenging when we're working remote. But outside of that too, it's just really difficult to do that in general now. And the question is if that's even something that we should still try to uphold. And I think, especially given all of the things that we as a society have faced in 2020, what role do employers play in trying to alleviate some of those stressors for their employees?
Well, I can certainly agree with you, Vanessa, that 2020 has certainly been one for the history books.
Yeah.
And if I had to title that chapter of that book, it would be Change and Adaptability. And the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought fear and uncertainty to all of us. You know, and we have to look at the changes people have had to overcome. As employers, we have to look at our employees and each other as well. And during these times, we all know tensions can certainly run high during times of change and uncertainty. And it brings a whole different level of stress for people. And I think it's important for employers and team leads and supervisors and managers, all the way up to the top of the leadership pole, to be available to talk to teams. Providing perhaps employee assistance programs where your employees can get needed help, and truly be able to listen to your employees when they need to understand what they're experiencing, what their mindset is. Showing some empathy and compassion can go a long way between employee morale and employer.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head with that one, Janice, in that the tools that we are building to adapt to adversity are things that we are going to carry with us going forward. And, you know, prioritizing making your employees feel safe and comfortable and supported, those are things that you can do regardless of when the COVID-19 pandemic comes to an official close. So thank you, Janice, so much. Very insightful information. Always a pleasure talking with you. And thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Vanessa. It's been a pleasure being here.
And thank you all for listening. If you are looking for additional insights on staffing and recruiting or workplace dynamics, you can always visit www.bridgepersonnel.com. In addition to our Bridge Insights page, we also have a COVID-19 workplace resource page, and this is specifically dedicated to helping professionals and businesses navigate through these difficult times. If you would like to start a conversation with Janice or me directly, our contact information can also be found on the Bridge website. And if you have found this podcast through social media, our contact information is also listed in the description below. Janice and I, along with the rest of the Bridge team, are always happy to answer any questions that you may have in regards to building an effective staffing program for your business, as well as provide any assistance connecting your team with the talented professionals that it deserves. Thank you again, Janice, for joining me, and we will see you all for episode 2.
Thanks all. Stay safe and healthy.